Okay, so Ken Levine is one of the best creative directors and writers in the industry. He has made some of my favorite games of all time. And his next game is especially ambitious because it does more than just what his usual games do, which is great world building, great gameplay, great level design. He does something much more ambitious here in the sense that he lets the game build itself based around your actions. Now, I have no doubt that you've heard about Judas before. Just 2 weeks ago, a bunch of interviews went up where a bunch of creators got to play the game early and they got to give their thoughts and kind of also do an interview with Ken Levine himself, where he sort of discussed a lot of the things about the game, a lot of his kind of ideas and how the game works. And I have shifted through quite a lot of that footage from various different creators, and I still don't really understand the game very well. There wasn't a lot of answers given, especially in terms of specifics, which makes a lot of sense. You know, you don't want to spoil the whole game, you don't want to give everything away, so you want to keep some stuff hush-hush, but without giving any specifics, it just means that a lot of us don't really understand the game, even when you show it and talk about it, because again, we're not getting any of those specific answers. Now, this game, as I mentioned, is incredibly ambitious because from what I've gathered, the game essentially builds itself based around you and what you choose to do. So the way it works, again, from what I gather, is that there are basically 3 characters, and these 3 characters all kind of have a relationship with you that can change throughout the course of the game based on what you choose to do. So if you choose to help one character, that may annoy the other character and their relationship status may go down a bit with you, and then that would cause the game to react to that. You know, they'll like rig doors and they'll rig health stations and kind of just do things to try and stop your progress because, hey, you're annoying them. And then they may later come to you with an offer and say, hey, I know, you know, we haven't been on the best terms, but I will give you this cool weapon if you help me do this thing. And the game kind of revolves around that. It's kind of a bunch of little choices that kind of dynamically progress through the story, and it all revolves around these 3 characters and your relationship with them. The term that Ken Levine himself uses a lot is narrative Legos, and I don't know if that is a good term to describe it. Obviously I haven't played the game, so maybe that is, maybe I just don't really understand it, but to me that just makes it a lot more confusing than what it is, because again, from what I can gather, it's more of just a relationship system. There's 3 characters and you have a relationship with them. You do something that may annoy one character, but it will build your relationship with another. And over the course of the game, you're gonna, you know, your relationship's gonna change with all of these characters, and by the end of the game, you're gonna have probably a high relationship with one and low relationship with the others, and that would kind of determine your ending. At least that's, again, what I gather. But the way he describes narrative Legos kind of it makes it a little more confusing, because he kind of says these narrative blocks are a bit like Legos and that you can kind of change them in and out based on, you know, what you as the player does. So, you know, there will be like one line of dialogue in a cutscene that is a narrative block, but that can be changed with another line of dialogue in a cutscene, and they can kind of be swapped around and moved around. This is where it gets confusing and a little worrying for me, because I feel like there is a bit of over-promising going on here and a little bit of over-hypeness, because I don't think this sounds very good, and I don't think it's really possible either. Because when he says narrative Legos, he's kind of making it sound like the game is going to be very, very dynamic on a narrative level. So that every time you play this game, you're going to have a completely different experience. The characters are going to be different. Things are going to happen at different times. You know, you're going to see things that you've never seen before. Obviously, that isn't true. That can't be true. This isn't a procedurally generated game, for the record. This is all handcrafted content, and there's only so much content that can actually be handcrafted. So I'm kind of struggling to see how one playthrough would be completely different to the other, unless it's, you know, in terms of moving different areas around. So, you know, I may go to my friend and go, hey, I had this cool moment in the story where this thing happened, and then he'll turn around and go, oh yeah, I had that, but mine was much later on and it was with this character instead. It seems like they're very small changes. Like, that's kind of how I'm picturing it in my head, because I can't imagine the game being so expansive and so big. You know, the narrative Lego thing to me seems in a way kind of pointless, because yeah, I will have a different experience, but how much can that really vary if this is all handcrafted content? I don't think very much. But my absolute main concern with this is the fact that the narrative, I think, is gonna suffer quite a bit. And what I mean when I say that is that a big important part of stories in general is, of course, the pacing and the connection with the characters that you have. Now, to have the characters be dynamic and have them have their own relationship with you, the player, that changes based on your actions, basically a choice-based game, that's really cool. I love that. I love that idea. That's cool. But he's saying it's more than just a choice-based game with a relationship system. He's saying that, again, the whole narrative can change. Again, narrative Legos, everything can change completely differently. And that is kind of where I get a bit kind of confused and concerned. Because how do you design a narrative that is really compelling and has good pacing and has good character connections if everything is going to kind of be getting swapped out based on what you do and kind of jumbled up? Now, he says, and this is one of his quotes, that he is basically building the game to, he's teaching the game, to build itself based on what you do. So the game basically builds the entire story based on your actions, which, again, that's kind of where my concern lies, because how can you guarantee that the story is going to be good? How can you guarantee that the pacing is going to be good and that the narrative in general is going to be good if you don't have any direct control over that? That kind of worries me a little bit. Like I said, I really like the idea of a relationship system in a sort of Bioshock game where you have these characters and you can choose to side with one or the other. That is a really cool idea, but and that's kind of where I think the cool ideas stop, because I just don't understand the rest of this narrative Lego thing. And again, I have sat through these interviews, I have watched gameplay, I have really tried to understand this, and I just can't. I can't really wrap my head around how it works and what the point of it is. Because obviously a big point of it is for replayability, right? You know, you can replay the game and you'll have a completely different experience. There have been games that have tried that in the past and have failed, because procedural generation doesn't really work that well in narrative games. I think it's a really good tool for like survival games, and I think it's a really good starting point for like open world games, you know, like generate a bunch of terrain and then build off of that. But to actually use it to design your narratives for you, I think is a bit weird. It's kind of difficult to wrap my head around. And again, even though this is procedurally generated, it's not AI generated, so all of this content is still handcrafted, so it is still going to have that kind of handcrafted feeling to it, but it's going to be in like a jumbled order, which I don't know. Obviously the jumbled order will make sense based on what you're doing, I would hope, but still, how do you get that to work well enough to provide a good narrative? I just don't really understand it. But beyond the narrative, there is also some concern in actual gameplay as well, because the levels are also designed in a way that they're procedurally generated. Now, there's basically a bunch of handcrafted modules, so you may have like a restaurant and an aquarium, and these will be handcrafted sort of rooms and modules, but they will be jumbled around when you actually play. So where I may walk through a door and find a huge restaurant, you may walk through a door and find a huge aquarium at the exact same part of the game, because the way that the story is generating itself and the way that the game is generating itself is different for you and I. And that is cool. That is a really cool idea in theory, but again, I'm doubting how well that will work in practicality, because he says that the posters in the game, the art, every little thing around the game is all kind of procedurally generated and placed randomly based on your playthrough. Again, that kind of worries me a little, because there's no doubt, I think, in quite a lot of our minds that handcrafted content is better than procedural content. It just always is. It always has been. And although this is handcrafted content, it is placed in a procedural way, which I think may get a little bit weird, because I don't see how it's possible to build a game off of that kind of structure. To me, that doesn't make any sense, because you either have a system that is quite underwhelming and it just does what I say, it just replaces rooms around, and oh, you may play one playthrough and there may be a restaurant here, and then you play another playthrough and instead of a restaurant it's an aquarium. That's not really that big of a difference. Like, why even bother at that point? You know what I mean? Like, that's not that exciting to play through the game again just to get a different room, especially because you probably would have seen that room in the other playthrough as well. So let's say, again, one playthrough, there's a hallway here, there's a room here which is a restaurant, and then there's a room up here which is an aquarium, okay? And then on your next playthrough, instead of it being like that, you'll have the aquarium be here and you'll have the restaurant be here. Like, they've just kind of swapped places, you know? But you're still visiting the same rooms. It's the same modules that you've seen before. It's not really anything new. So it's kind of a weird decision, I think, because you either go the route of having a bunch of procedurally generated content, which could be really interesting, but also very much break your game and kind of lose a lot of that charm that these games have. Or you just have a bit of an underwhelming kind of experience, at which point you kind of have to ask yourself, why even bother? Now, a lot of my concern, I'm sure, is just from the fact that I don't understand it. I don't understand how these systems work because, again, they didn't really go into specifics. There wasn't any examples given, so it's still kind of very confusing all in my head. But I think some of my concerns are actually very real, and that I'm worried that this game is going a procedural content way, because I do think that is really, really difficult to wrap into a good narrative story. Now, as I said, I get the idea. In concept, a game that builds itself based on your actions, while also maintaining all of that handcrafted content that, you know, we love the Bioshock series for, that is a really cool idea, and that's kind of where I want games to head, right? I want games to stop improving on graphics. I don't care about ray tracing. I don't care about how many polygons are in a model, you know, I don't care about all that. I want really cool AI systems, I want really cool game systems, I want games to focus on what make games unique, right? The actual gameplay stuff. That's where I want games to head. So on one hand, I get it, and I am very, very intrigued by it, but then on the other hand, I'm just doubting if it's possible, because it sounds like there's either a lot of overpromising going on, which I think is going to disappoint a lot of people, or it sounds like the game is going to be a bit of a mess. Because again, I can't wrap my head around how it would work. If it's like a super complicated actual narrative Lego thing, cool. But have you actually got that working? All in all though, I am very, very intrigued by Judas. I really am. I've been watching all of this not because I wanted to make a video on it, but just because the game genuinely does intrigue me. Again, Ken Levine has a great portfolio behind him. He's made some of my favorite games. And I think if anyone can pull this sort of game off and really take the gaming industry by surprise and make something revolutionary, it's gonna be Ken Levine, right? Like, if someone's gonna do it, it's probably gonna be him. But at the same time, I'm kind of looking at all these interviews and I'm thinking, like, why are you not giving more examples? Like, yeah, sure, you don't want to spoil it, but like, in the back of my mind, I'm kind of thinking, like, we've been misled before, we've been lied to before, we have been overpromised to before. And it kind of feels like that's kind of what's happening here. Like, they had the idea to make a really cool, unique, ambitious game, but then like halfway through development they realized, oh, this isn't actually really possible, we can't do this. But they still had to appease shareholders, they still had to deliver something, so they're just kind of overpromising and overhyping it and just kind of making it seem better than it actually is. That's kind of the feeling I get. And I really, really, really hope I'm wrong. I really hope that when the game comes out and I play it, I can sit here and I can make another video and I can say, wow, I was completely wrong. This game blew me away. It is unbelievably amazing, right? And every game developer needs to take something out of this, right? But I'm just kind of doubting that that's going to happen. I feel like it's going to be a bit of an underwhelming experience. I don't think it's going to be a bad game by any means, because the gameplay that we've seen looks incredibly polished and fun. It has that, it's Bioshock, you know, it's Bioshock gameplay. So of course it's going to be good, but I'm doubting that it's going to be great, amazing, or a masterpiece. Just because, again, the lack of details that we're getting and kind of how they're explaining all these systems, the fact that I have watched over an hour in interviews and I'm still just completely confused on how the systems work and how everything properly works, that to me is a bit of a worrying sign. And again, maybe it's just that they don't want to spoil things. Maybe it's just that I'm stupid. Maybe it's because they're kind of misleading and kind of over-promising stuff that isn't actually as exciting as it sounds. But again, you're not going to present a game and kind of undersell it, you know what I mean? So it kind of makes sense that they are going to overpromise and oversell. And again, that's just kind of what I feel like is kind of happening here. Regardless though, I'm going to be keeping a close eye on this game. I'm absolutely going to be playing it day one when it comes out, because I want to see for myself what it is all about. So you can expect an update on that in the future, whenever that is. I don't think we have a release date for the game yet. but I will remain cautiously optimistic and keep an eye on it. But let me know what you think of Judas down below. Have you watched the interviews? What do you think of the systems? Do you understand better than me how it works? Let me know all of your thoughts down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss the next time I upload. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time.